All right, students, let's start from where we left off. We started by saying the 1962 movement against Ayub's education policy was an important milestone in the history of our democratic struggles against the Pakistani state, against Ayub Khan and the military bureaucratic state of Pakistan. What Ayub Khan's education policy or the Education Commission's report suggested was Urdu should be made the language of the people of Pakistan. Even the 56, remember? They agreed that national language, Bengali should be one of them. But Sharif Commission said Urdu should be made the language of the people of Pakistan. English should be made compulsory from 4th grade. No free primary education, and education should not be subsidized. In fact, basically what Sharif Education Commission, Ayub Khan's Education Commission was saying is education should be private. Only people who can pay for it, they would get an education. Even primary education should not be free, implying poor people would not get an education, implying even those that were educated would be learning Urdu and learning all subjects in Urdu. And English should be made compulsory. Now, of course, you're thinking, some of you, that why would that be so bad? It would be bad because there was already a huge big divide between rural and urban. Remember, we were talking about how the urban areas, it was a rise of a new middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, who was generally more fluent with English. In the rural areas, education wasn't existing at all. And one needed to start with a native language so students could start learning. And English could be introduced much later. But starting English so early on would make it difficult for especially poor village people to master that so early on, and it would create a far bigger divide. Anyway, so the students protested against this privatization of education, against ensuring that the great majority of the people remained illiterate. This is a picture of the 1962 movement against Ayub Khan. Even now, I think I think September in 1962, police firing, students were killed, and that is even now celebrated as Education Day. So beyond then, the 1962 student movement against the education policy, you have in 1965 a disastrous war with India. Even though at that time in Pakistan we were being told how the Indians lost the war. We didn't. It was India-Pakistan war over Kashmir, and Indians captured some territories in Pakistan, and also Pakistan's intent in liberating Kashmir felt. But the important thing then was, we realized in East Pakistan, there was nobody to defend us. The army was mostly in West Pakistan. So if India had attacked, India could have taken up East Pakistan, taken over East Pakistan in a matter of days. There was nothing here. We felt extremely defenseless. We realized West Pakistan didn't even care for our defense. So that was one issue with the 1965 war. There was a huge disparity that, remember, we talked about in last class that was unfolding. There was a great dissatisfaction with that. In 1966, the 6-point demand that we talked about in last class, that started. And there was a massive movement around the 6-point program from 1966 to 1969. Sheikh Mujib and the top leadership of the Awami League were getting arrested. Most of them were in prison. And it wasn't just Sheikh Mujib and the Awami League. It was also major movements organized by other political parties, specifically the left-wing political parties such as the National Awami Party, both Muzaffar-led National Awami Party and Maulana Abdul Hamid Khan Bhashani-led National Awami Party. Incidentally, you need to also know that though Mujib, of course, has been a consistent fighter for the rights of Bengalis, Maulana Abdul Hamid Khan Bhashani also played a huge role in the struggles for Bengalis, in the struggles for peasants and for oppressed people. In 1968, the Pakistan government framed the Agartala conspiracy case against Mujib and several others. The Pakistani government claimed that Sheikh Mujib and others had gone to Agartala to receive the support of India to create a plot for the succession of East Pakistan. There was no evidence, and they could not put up any major reasons for the trial, but this trial was put up because Ayub Khan realized that Sheikh Mujib at 6 point was too dangerous for him, for his throne, for his government, and he wanted to stop that. So these Agartala conspiracy case trumped up charges. The idea was Sheikh Mujib, because of course you know the judicial scene was generally biased towards the government, not always, but in a lot of ways. And Ayub Khan, because this was a special case, a treason, a case of treason, Ayub Khan felt he could control the outcome of that, and he would then hang Mujib and a few others because of supposed charges of peace. But that too sparked a huge protest all over Bengal. And at the end of 1968, we had in Pakistan, actually earlier, I think it was October, November in Pakistan, that Bhutto launched his movement against Ayub Khan in West Pakistan, not on the basis of our demands, but because Bhutto was an ambitious man and he wanted to get rid of Ayub Khan. But students in West Pakistan organized against Ayub Khan. That had some repercussion here, but primarily it was Agartala Shorajantro Mamla, the Agartala conspiracy case, the oppression of the government, the ensuring that people couldn't speak. In fact, in Dhaka University at that time, Munim Khan, who was the governor of East Pakistan at that time, he had his own thugs, his own gundas, especially two names I will mention, Khoka and Part-2, who created a reign of terror in Dhaka University and would not let any student speak out against the government. They would just go out and they would beat people up, they would stab students. So all that oppression was going on. So finally, in December 1968, students within Dhaka University, because the protest was going on all over, students started organizing at the end of 1968, and this led to the mass upsurge that ended the dictatorship of Ayub Khan. We mentioned here again the 6 points. We had talked about that, so we won't spend time discussing it, but basically it was the demand for regional autonomy. 6 point movement, as I said, all over the country, everywhere. And police were arresting everyone. The prisons were full. Students, peasants, workers were all full. Again, not just Awami Leaguers, but others too. Others belonging to the left parties and the left organizations. This is Mujib being taken to court for the trial. So 68, 69, I said 1968, student movement started getting energized, and in 1969, in January, it reached its peak, its zenith. The Dhaka University Central Students' Union and Tufail Ahmed, who is a minister now in the present government, a young student leader at that time. He was the vice president of the Dhaka University Central Students' Union, popularly known as Dakshu. He was a member of the Students' League. He led this student movement, a mass alliance of students left-wing students, Students' League, and others. The mass alliance, aside from Muslim League students, aside from extreme right-wing students, which were a few in number, so the students organized. And here is a picture of Assad, who on January 20th, he was killed in police firing. Remember Assad Gate? When you go towards Muhammadpur, this Assad Gate, it's named after Assad. He was killed in police firing in January 20th. A lot of students were killed, but Assad is best known. On January 24th, another student whose name was very famous, Motiur, he was a school student of Nobukumar Institute. He was also killed on January 24th. I was a young student, I still hadn't done my matric exam, but I was involved in all of these student demonstrations as a school student at that time. And then finally, Ayub Khan, realizing that he had lost all power, that he could not rule, but instead of agreeing to the demand for democracy, the democratic rights, he handed over power to the commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army, General Agha Muhammad Yahya Khan. He came to power in 1969 and he ruled till 1971. What he did initially was good. He said he would announced national elections. First ever election on the basis of universal adult franchise in Pakistan, all Pakistan. In the past, it was just East Pakistan. In that election in 1970, end of 1970, Awami League wins the majority. Of 162 seats in East Pakistan, they won one state. And since the National Assembly was 300 seats, Awami League had won the majority and had the right to form government. Another thing happened in that year in 1970, in November, there was a mega cyclone, Jalochash, a tidal wave that killed 500,000 people in coastal East Pakistan, Bhola, the offshore islands, and elsewhere. The Pakistani government wasn't even aware that a cyclone had struck. It was foreign news agencies that told them that. And the Pakistan government failed to intervene on time, failed to intervene adequately, even though relief efforts came in from all over the world, and people in Bangladesh organized to provide relief. So then, even more than before, Bengalis realized that not only were they exploitative, the Pakistan government, they were totally indifferent to our plight. On March 1st, the assembly, because Awami League had won, the assembly was scheduled to start on March 3rd. Then March 1st, at 1 p.m., we will discuss this more in the next class, Yahya Khan declares the National Assembly postponed because Bhutto, Pakistan's People's Party, which were a minority, but which were a majority in West Pakistan, Bhutto did not want power to go to Mujib. And in fact, the Pakistan state also did not want Mujib to take over power of the government. So and the military, of course, part of the military bureaucratic state. And they persuaded Yahya Khan to postpone the elections, basically to say there would be no elections. March 1st, 1 p.m., short radio broadcast, Yahya Khan declares postponement of elections. 1:05, announcement stops, and Bangladesh erupts. Everywhere, every person, whether a cricket match was going on in the stadium, Pakistan versus, I forget, MCC or someone, people came out into the streets. We ran from Dhaka College, I was in Dhaka College at that time, ran to Dhaka University. People were all over. Tens of thousands of people coming out in the street, basically recognized that Yahya Khan had destroyed Pakistan. We'll talk more about that in next class. We talked about the cyclone, and we'll talk next class about civil disobedience movement in Pakistan. All right, let's stop here. Thank you very much.